The CEO's daughter-in-law said no one will believe you. During the final audit of a $300 million acquisition, she presented her original email to the regulator. She read it, closed her file, and calmly asked the CEO, "Is your legal counsel here?" For 6 months, Jonathan Hale, SI, Senior Compliance Officer at Yatsen Arden Global, Sakte, lived in the shadows of boardrooms where billion-dollar deals were brokered. His latest assignment was his most daunting yet, the final audit of a Tejas $300 million acquisition that would determine whether Arden Global merged with Pfizer Fairmont Technologies, a rising giant in defense software. On paper, everything looked pristine, profits aligned, contracts were airtight, and projections dazzled investors. But Jonathan had a nose for deceit. Numbers spoke their own language, and these numbers whispered warnings. Each late-night balance sheet revealed the same faint anomaly. Funds routed through subsidiaries that seemed to exist only on paper. Jonathan wasn't the type to jump at shadows. He had built his career on patience, on confirming suspicions with irrefutable data. But the more he dug, the louder the whispers became, until he could no longer pretend the irregularities were harmless errors. Something, or someone, was deliberately dressing up Fairmont's value. The pressure from above didn't make things easier. Richard Vance, CEO of Arden Global, was obsessed with pushing the deal through. His empire had been weakening for years, stock prices slipping, while competitors surged ahead. This acquisition wasn't just another business move. It was his chance to rewrite the legacy of the Vance name. Anyone who questioned the deal was either silenced with a fat check or quietly removed from meetings. Jonathan experienced that threat firsthand one evening when Isabel Vance, Richard's daughter-in-law, cornered him in the marble-floored lobby. Isabel wasn't on the payroll in any official capacity, yet everyone knew she was Richard's shadow strategist. With her razor-sharp suits and an uncanny ability to sniff out dissent, she acted as both messenger and enforcer. She stepped directly into his path, heels clicking like a metronome. "You're clever," she said smoothly, her voice as polished as her appearance. "But you're also naive. No one will believe you if you question this acquisition. Not the board, not the regulators, not even your own team. This deal is already done." Jonathan tried to mask the chill that ran through him. His hands clenched in his coat pockets. "Truth doesn't care about timing, Isabel," he replied quietly. "It only cares about evidence." Her lips curved into a smile that was more blade than warmth. "Then I suggest you forget what you think you've found. If you value your career or your life outside these walls, you'll stay in line." She didn't wait for his response. She pivoted on her heels and strode away, leaving Jonathan standing alone with the weight of her words pressing into his chest. That night, Jonathan lay awake in his apartment, the city's glow seeping through his blinds. Her threat wasn't an empty one. He had seen what happened to others who crossed Isabel or Richard. Some had resigned abruptly. Others had vanished into consulting roles at companies no one had ever heard of. But Jonathan wasn't completely alone. The next morning, buried in his encrypted inbox, he found an anonymous email. No signature, no introduction, just a subject line that read, "Check the executive email chain," dated February 12th. Attached was a PDF. Jonathan hesitated before opening it, pulse quickening. When he finally did, the screen filled with black and white text, an internal exchange between Isabel and Richard. His breath caught. The content was nothing short of explosive. Discussions of moving acquisition funds through shell companies to inflate Fairmont's valuation, talk of securing personal bonuses before the deal closed, and instructions to disguise the fraud as strategic adjustments. Jonathan printed a copy immediately, his fingers trembling. as the printer spat out page after damning page. But even as he stared at the evidence in his hands, he knew possession wasn't enough. If he revealed it too early, Richard and Isabel would bury him along with the paper trail. If he revealed it too late, the acquisition would close, and the fraud would be locked in stone. No, this required precision. The stage had to be perfect, the audience undeniable, and the upcoming Shop'em final audit presentation was just that. Regulators, the board, investors, and legal counsel would all be in one room. One misstep could ruin his career, but one well-timed move could shatter Richard's empire. Isabel had told him no one would believe him. Jonathan almost smiled at the irony, because soon she would hand over the proof herself, and when she did, the woman who tried to silence him would deliver the weapon that would destroy her own empire. The day of the final audit felt more like a high-stakes performance than a routine review. The boardroom gleamed under recessed lighting, its long oak table polished to a mirror shine. On one side sat Arden Global's leadership, faces carefully composed, masks of control. At the head of the table, Richard Vance exuded confidence, his cufflinks glinting like trophies. To him, this wasn't an audit. It was the last formality before he secured his legacy. The other side of the room told a different story. Jonathan Hale sat with his files neatly stacked, the quiet weight of truth in front of him. Around him, the state regulators leaned forward, pens poised, eyes sharp. They weren't dazzled by projections or promises. They wanted clarity, numbers, proof. The meeting opened with rehearsed ease. Isabel Vance took the floor, her voice smooth as silk. She moved through slides of revenue synergies, market forecasts, and projected growth curves with the elegance of someone who had practiced in front of a mirror. Every word was calibrated, every gesture calculated. She painted the $300 million acquisition as inevitable, a golden merger that only a fool would question. To most in the room, it sounded flawless. To Jonathan, it sounded like a well-rehearsed lie. He wasn't listening to the numbers anymore. He was watching her, how she lingered on certain phrases, how her eyes flicked toward Richard for silent approval. Halfway through, a regulator finally broke the rhythm. "Ms. Vance," he said, tapping his pen, "there are valuation inconsistencies in Fairmont's disclosures, specifically the flow of funds through your international subsidiaries. Can you clarify their legitimacy?" The air shifted. For the briefest second, Isabel's eyes flickered, but she recovered instantly. With unshakable poise, she opened her leather-bound folder and slid a set of documents across the table. "This," she said, her voice steady, "is the original correspondence regarding those adjustments. It should dispel any doubts." Jonathan's pulse quickened. He recognized the folder, the pages inside, the very email chain that had landed in his inbox weeks ago. Isabel was presenting the weapon that could destroy her, convinced she could spin it into justification. Meredith Cho, Arden's chief legal counsel, picked up the file. She began to read aloud quietly, her eyes narrowing line by line. Jonathan watched her expression shift from mild curiosity to hard disapproval. Then, with a sharp thud, she snapped the file shut. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a gavel. "Richard, is your legal counsel here?" The question sliced through the air like a blade. Richard forced a laugh, though it cracked at the edges. "Meredith, you are my legal counsel." Meredith set the folder down slowly, her eyes locking on him. "Then let me be very clear. This document isn't justification. It is evidence of fraudulent intent, a written admission of moving funds through shell accounts to inflate valuation. This isn't regulatory oversight. This is criminal exposure." The room detonated. Board members erupted, voices colliding in panic. Some shouted questions. Others whispered to one another in horror. Regulators scribbled notes furiously, already exchanging looks that spoke louder than words. Richard's confidence shattered in real time. His once assured posture slumped. His face drained of color. He tried to object, mumbling about strategic structuring and industry practices. But the language of the email was damning. It didn't speak of strategy. It spoke of deception, bonuses, and cover-ups. Jonathan sat perfectly still, his hands folded. For 10 years, he had been dismissed as the quiet compliance man. Now silence was his power. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to point fingers. The truth was already screaming from the page Isabel herself had offered. Isabel, too, tried to recover. These are standard adjustments. Every acquisition involves. Enough. Meredith cut in sharply. Standard practice doesn't include instructing executives to move funds to inflate figures or to secure payouts before closing. The language is explicit. You've handed regulators a signed confession. The regulators closed their files with finality. This matter is under immediate review, one declared. The acquisition is suspended pending investigation. The meeting dissolved in chaos. Richard tried to rally his board, but their faces had already turned on him. Anger, betrayal, fear, etched into every line. Isabel's commanding presence crumbled into frantic whispers, her voice no longer carrying authority, but desperation. By evening, word had leaked to the markets. Ardent Global's stock dipped sharply. Within days, the acquisition collapsed entirely. Weeks later, charges were announced by the Securities Commission. Richard Vance resigned under pressure, his empire collapsing around him. Isabel disappeared from the executive circuit, her name now synonymous with scandal rather than influence. Jonathan, meanwhile, was called into a private meeting with Meredith Cho. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. You played this well. You didn't grandstand. You let arrogance destroy itself. That takes strategy. Jonathan only nodded. For the first time in years, he walked out of Arden Global's tower, with his head held high. Isabel had told him once that no one would believe him. But in the end, she believed in herself too much and handed over the proof that sealed her downfall. Because in business, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, waits, and watches as arrogance signs its own confession.